The Queen owned Britain's rarest car collection, Rolls-Royces, a £10 million Bentley. Here's the thing, not the surprising part. The rarest one wasn't for sale. Only 18 ever built, reserved for royalty. She owned the first before she was even Queen. Let's start at the beginning, because most people assume Queen Elizabeth inherited her car collection the moment she took the throne. She didn't. This story starts 2 years earlier, in a rather ordinary-looking Mayfair car showroom, with a young woman who wasn't Queen yet at all. In November 1948, Princess Elisabeth and Prince Philip placed an order with Rolls-Royce for a car built entirely to their own specification. It had to be a proper limousine, fit for official duties. But Philip also wanted something he could drive himself, so it needed genuine performance too. No mean feat for a car the size of a small drawing room. Rolls-Royce delivered it in the summer of 1950, painted a deep, secretive shade called Valentine Green, with red pinstriping along the beltline. At that point it was simply a very grand private car, belonging to a young royal couple. Then in February 1952, everything changed. Her father died, she became Queen. And that same car was quietly repainted in royal claret and black, the sovereign's own colours, and turned into an official state car overnight. The car didn't change. Its owner's entire life did. Here's the detail that separates the Queen's cars from anyone else's, however wealthy. That car she ordered in 1948 was a Rolls-Royce Phantom 4. And the Phantom 4 isn't just rare, it's the most exclusive production car Rolls-Royce has ever built. Just 18 were ever made. Not 18,000. 18. And here's the bit that'll stop you in your tracks. You couldn't simply write a cheque for one, no matter how large. Rolls-Royce's board quietly decided, without ever putting it in writing, that the Phantom 4 would only go to royalty and heads of state. Enthusiasts begged. Wealthy industrialists offered eye-watering sums. Every single one was turned away. The only people who ever sat behind the wheel of a new Phantom 4 were kings, queens, and presidents. Generalissimo Franco owned 3. The Shah of Iran had one in pale blue. And Princess Elisabeth's was the very first one built, commissioned before anyone else had even placed their order. It's the automotive equivalent of a private members club with exactly 18 chairs, and no amount of money on earth can buy you a 19th. Now, if you've ever seen a Rolls-Royce, you know the little silver figure leaning forward on the bonnet, the spirit of ecstasy. It's arguably the most recognised car mascot in the world. The Queen's Phantom 4 didn't have one. In its place sat a small silver sculpture of St. George on horseback, spearing a dragon beneath him, designed in 1952, the very year she came to the throne, by the artist Edward Seago. It's a detail so quiet that most people who've stood metres away from that car at state occasions never clocked what they were looking at. That mascot has ridden through some of the most significant moments in modern royal history. It carried the Queen to her first engagement as monarch, a Maundy service at Westminster Abbey, weeks after her father's death. It carried her to the state opening of Parliament in 1955, when a national rail strike cancelled the usual grand procession. Decades later, that same car, with the ordinary spirit of ecstasy back in place for the occasion, carried Meghan Markle to her wedding at St. George's Chapel. Same car, different mascot. 70 years of history riding on the bonnet, and almost nobody watching ever noticed. By 2002, the 50-year mark of her reign, Rolls-Royce's grip on the royal garage had loosened. Bentley wanted in, and they didn't hold back to make their case. To mark the Golden Jubilee, Bentley built the Queen a car unlike anything else on British roads, the Bentley State Limousine. Only 2 were ever made. Twin turbocharged V8, armoured from bumper to bumper, and reportedly valued at somewhere around £10 million, at one point cited as the second most expensive car in the world. Think about that for a second. A car built purely as a gift that most private buyers on earth couldn't afford, even if Bentley agreed to sell them one, which they wouldn't. It became the Queen's principal car for state business for the next 2 decades, gliding past crowds who had no idea they were looking at £10 million of British engineering, dressed up to look almost understated. That's the trick of the whole collection, really. The grandest cars in the world, doing their absolute best to look like they're simply doing their job. Now, for all the Rolls-Royces and Bentleys, ask anyone who actually knew the Queen what car suited her best, and they won't say any of those. They'll say Land Rover. She reportedly kept around 30 of them over the years, spanning almost the entire history of the marque, from the earliest Series 1 models right through to the modern Defender. These weren't ceremonial cars wheeled out for cameras once a year. These were her daily drivers, around the Sandringham and Balmoral estates, mud on the tyres, dogs in the back, and the Queen herself behind the wheel. There's something rather telling in that. The woman who owned some of the rarest, most valuable cars ever built genuinely preferred the one that got dirty. No chauffeur required, no motorcade, just her, a headscarf, and several hundred acres of Scottish countryside. It's the difference between the cars built for the crown and the cars built for the woman underneath it. Now, before we get into the cars that even most royal enthusiasts have never heard of, if you're enjoying this journey through the royal muse, do us a favour. Hit that like button, drop a comment telling us which car has surprised you most so far, and subscribe with the notification bell on so you don't miss what's coming next. Right, back to the collection. Here's a fact that surprises almost everyone. The Queen never needed a driving licence. As monarch, she was exempt from the requirement entirely. The licences, after all, are issued in her name. But that's not the surprising part. The surprising part is that she could genuinely drive, and drive well, because during the Second World War she trained as a mechanic. As a teenager, she joined the Auxiliary Territorial Service, learned to strip an engine, change a wheel, and drive military vehicles under proper wartime instruction. She wasn't handed the keys as a novelty. She earned that seat. That grounding never left her. Decades later, when a visiting head of state, reportedly the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, expressed doubt that women were permitted to drive at all in his own country, the Queen is said to have taken him for a spin around the Balmoral estate herself, at the wheel, no security car in front. A Queen, a mechanic's training, and a point made without a single word needed. Not every car in the collection was there for use. Some were there purely because of what they represented. The 1924 Rolls-Royce Silver Ghost is considered one of the rarest cars on Earth, a single example having sold at auction for more than $7 million. The Queen owned one purely as a collectible piece. Automotive history, under a dust sheet if you like, kept not for state occasions or for pottering around an estate, but simply because it mattered. It's an easy detail to miss amid the working fleet of Land Rovers and the armoured Bentleys. But it tells you something about the collection as a whole. This wasn't just transport. Somewhere among the practical cars and the ceremonial ones sat genuine museum pieces, owned by a woman who understood exactly what she had and exactly what it was worth to keep it. While the Pope had his Pope Mobile, rolling slowly through St. Peter's Square with the crowds reaching up towards it, the Queen had something rather similar in spirit, dressed up in considerably more understated British fashion, as these things tend to be done on this side of the Channel. A Range Rover custom built to her own precise specification, fitted with a half-open roof that allowed her to stand upright and be properly seen during royal processions and outdoor engagements. This wasn't a vehicle borrowed from a general car pool and hastily adapted the night before an event. It was purpose-built from the ground up, designed specifically around one single requirement, that thousands of people lining a route, having queued for hours in the cold to catch a glimpse, could actually see the monarch they'd come to watch, rather than being met with a wall of tinted glass and a reflection of their own disappointed faces. It's a small, unglamorous piece of engineering really when you break it down, but it says a great deal about the job itself and about how much thought went into every single vehicle that carried her. Even the Queen's cars had to be built around the fact that being seen was, quite literally, part of the role. Not a happy accident of the design, but the entire point of it. Not every car in this story stayed in the collection. Some were given away entirely, handed to the next generation, and quietly became someone else's legend in the process, which is, in its own way, rather how the whole monarchy works. A 1966 Aston Martin DB6 Volante is widely reported to have been bought by the Queen as a present for her son, then Prince Charles, on his 18th or 21st birthday, depending on which account you believe. Whatever the exact occasion, he's driven that car for decades since, treating it less like royal property and more like a genuinely beloved possession. most famously behind the wheel of it on his own wedding day to Camilla in 2005, cutting through the crowds in Windsor with the roof down. And in one of the more eccentric footnotes in royal motoring history, the car was later modified, at Charles's own request, to run on a bioethanol fuel derived from surplus English wine and whey, a byproduct of cheesemaking, of all things. Engineers spent months adapting the engine so it could run on the stuff without complaint. A car gifted by one future monarch to another, now running in part on leftover wine and cheese production. If that isn't a very particular kind of British eccentricity, wrapped up in a very expensive car, nothing is. We mentioned earlier that only 18 Phantom 4s were ever built, each one reserved for royalty and heads of state alone. Among those 18, one particular variant stands out as rarer still and more significant than almost any other vehicle in the entire Royal Mews, the 1955 State Landaulet, with coachwork by Hooper and Company. A landaulet, for anyone unfamiliar with the term, has a fixed solid roof over the front seats, but an open, foldable section over the rear. Precisely the configuration you want if you happen to be a monarch who needs to remain visible to a watching crowd while still travelling in genuine, weatherproof comfort for the rest of the journey. Powered by a 5.7-litre straight-8 engine, the only straight-8 Rolls-Royce ever built, incidentally, a genuine one-off within a one-off. It remains one of the most quietly significant vehicles in the entire royal fleet, built to a standard that simply doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. Pulled out only for the most formal of occasions, coronations and state visits, and the very grandest of processions. It's the kind of car that exists for perhaps 3 or 4 moments a year, and spends the rest of its life waiting patiently in the Mews, polished to a mirror shine, for the next one to arrive. For an entire century, one single manufacturer held an unbroken grip on the royal garage, and it wasn't Rolls-Royce, and it certainly wasn't Bentley. From 1900 onwards, it was Daimler that held the royal warrant, supplying the cars for coronations, weddings, state funerals, and every grand procession in between, generation after generation, without interruption. Then in 2002, that century of loyalty quietly came to an end. Bentley delivered the first of those custom state limousines for the Golden Jubilee, and the long, unbroken Daimler tradition simply stopped, without fanfare, without a formal announcement marking the moment for what it was. It's easy to read that shift as nothing more than a simple change of taste, the sort of thing that happens when any of us swap one brand of car for another. But it's worth pausing on just how significant 100 years of loyalty to a single marque actually represents, particularly within an institution built almost entirely on continuity and tradition. Companies rise and fall on royal patronage of exactly this kind. Losing that warrant, after generations of unbroken service stretching back to the turn of the 20th century, was a genuinely seismic moment in British motoring history. And most of the country never even noticed it happen, because it happened quietly, the way most things at the palace tend to. We touched on this earlier, but it deserves its own moment in the spotlight, because the sheer span of it is genuinely remarkable once you lay it all out. That original 1950 Phantom 4, the very first one ever built, ordered before she was even queen, back when she was simply a young newlywed with her whole reign still ahead of her, has now carried royal history across 3 separate generations of the same family. It drove Elisabeth to her first engagement as monarch in 1952, weeks after her father's death, when the entire country was still learning to call her Your Majesty. It carried Prince Charles and Camilla, then Duchess of Cornwall, from Clarence House to Westminster Abbey for the royal wedding of Prince William and Catherine Middleton, threading through crowds that stretched the length of the Mall. It carried Meghan Markle to her wedding at St George's Chapel in 2018, and in September 2022, in altogether more sombre circumstances, it carried King Charles III himself from Westminster Hall to RAF Northolt, following his mother's death. The same bespoke St George mascot from earlier in this video fixed once more to the bonnet in her memory, in place of the usual spirit of ecstasy. One single car, 72 years of service, coronations, weddings and a funeral, all from the same leather seats. There simply isn't another vehicle in Britain that has witnessed quite so much history unfold from the driver's seat, quietly, without ever once being the story itself. Away from the state occasions, away from the cameras and the crowds lining the mall, an entirely different rule applied altogether. On the Sandringham and Balmoral estates, the Queen would often drive vehicles that technically didn't need number plates at all, simply because they never once left private roads, never crossed onto anything the public could actually see. Her favourite Land Rovers were finished in a deep, understated shade of green, practically a signature colour for the royal estate vehicles by this point, instantly recognisable to anyone who worked the land there. And she'd regularly be photographed, headscarf knotted under her chin, dogs shifting about in the back seat, driving herself out to a shoot or a picnic, exactly like any other countrywoman going about her business in Norfolk or Aberdeenshire. No motorcade trailing behind her, no armoured plating bolted beneath the floor, no protection officer hovering at her shoulder. Just a woman who genuinely, properly knew how to drive, doing precisely that for the sheer pleasure of it. It's the sharpest possible contrast to the Bentleys and the Phantoms sitting in the Mews, the most valuable car collection in the entire country, assembled over 70 years of duty, and its owner's actual favourite seat, the one she chose when nobody was watching and nothing was required of her, was a battered old Land Rover with a scuffed paint job and absolutely nothing left to prove. So, add it all up, roughly 25 to 30 cars in total, spanning the entire royal Mews, from the grandest Phantom right down to the muddiest working Land Rover. Estimates for the collection as a whole have put its value at somewhere in the region of £14 million, and that's before you even begin factoring in the sentimental and historical value that simply cannot be priced, because there is genuinely nothing else on earth quite like it to compare it against. And here's the quiet twist most people never stop to consider. Unlike almost every other asset the Crown holds, land, jewels, property, spread across the country, these cars aren't really about money at all, not in the way you'd expect. Some of them are worth an absolute fortune purely because Rolls-Royce refused point blank to ever sell that particular model to anyone else on earth, no matter how deep their pockets ran. Others are worth a fortune purely because of who happened to sit in the back seat during one single, specific afternoon in history, decades before anyone thought to write it down. You cannot manufacture that kind of value. However wealthy you are, however good your connections, you can only inherit it, drive it carefully, keep it polished in the Mews, and quietly hand it on to whoever comes next. So back to where we started. A woman who never needed a driving licence, who trained as a wartime mechanic, and who ended up custodian of a car collection that money genuinely could not buy. Because that's really the story here, isn't it? Every other collection in the world, however grand, can theoretically be replicated if you've got deep enough pockets. Buy the rarest classic car at auction, commission a coach builder, hire the best restorers money can find. Not this one. You could be the richest person alive and Rolls-Royce would still, politely, decline to sell you a Phantom for. There simply isn't a 19th one to have. That's what made this collection different from every wealthy person's garage on earth. It wasn't assembled by someone chasing status. It was built, piece by piece, around 70 years of duty. A car bought as a young newlywed that became a state vehicle overnight, a Bentley gifted for a jubilee, 30 Land Rovers that got genuinely muddy, and one small silver knight on a bonnet that most people watching never even noticed was there. The Rolls-Royces and the Bentleys did the job the Crown required of them. But it was that battered green Land Rover, dogs in the back, no motorcade, no number plate. That was the one that actually suited her. And perhaps that's the real story hidden inside the Queen's multi-million-pound car collection. Not the price tags, not the rarity, but the fact that, underneath every ounce of royal ceremony, there was a woman who simply loved to drive. And that's the story of the rarest, most quietly extraordinary car collection in Britain. Built not from vanity, but from 70 years of duty. One bonnet mascot, one gift, one muddy Land Rover at a time. If you enjoyed this journey through the Royal Mews, give this video a like and let us know down in the comments which of these cars you'd have loved to see in person. Subscribe, ring that notification bell and join us for the next video, where we'll be uncovering another piece of British history hiding in plain sight. Until then, from all of us at Britain's Best, thank you for watching and we'll see you in the next one.